This video is sponsored by PCBWay. So for quite some time now I've been carrying a Swiss Army knife in my pocket as my main EDC tool, until I actually bought a mini Knipex wrench, and I was super shocked that it completely replaced my pocket knife, even though it doesn't have any of the functions. And for some reason it lends itself really nicely to the types of things that I do, mostly because of the flat teeth. So with 3D printing and little build projects where we use nuts and bolts and that kind of stuff, this just works really nicely. But in general I was still missing a knife to open up boxes and a pair of scissors to cut through rope, and perhaps also a screwdriver to use it as a prying tool, for example. And I've had this idea in my head for a little while now, but I was really curious what it would be like if Knipex actually made a multi-tool. And so we're doing a one-day build video, kind of a proof of concept, checking out to see if we can build an EDC multi-tool which is super useful out of a Knipex wrench. Now, as this is a proof of concept and I only have one day to actually produce this thing, I'm not building the entire multi-tool from scratch. Although I did realize during this project that we could probably reverse engineer the entire thing. In this case though, I want to actually combine two tools together. So I found this really useful multi-tool on Amazon, which basically has all the things that I would want in my multi-tool, and it has it on one side. So all of the other components we can take off and then somehow mount it onto the Knipex wrench. I think most of the time with projects like this, I already have a really solid idea in my head of what it's going to look like, and I don't really need to draw anything down or, dot it out. So we have two handles, and I'm figuring out right here which handle we're going to be placing this thing on. So if we put it on the bottom handle, that's going to be a little bit difficult because that one is a lot larger, and so the part that we need to manufacture for that would be a lot larger as well, increasing the cost. And if we put it on the top handle, the part is very small. But it is a little bit more tricky because it has the entire mechanism in there to make the jaw open and close. Something else I didn't really know when I started this project is if this thing could even be taken apart. I'm not entirely sure how the button actually functions, or if that's like press fit into it to the point where you can't actually remove it anymore. So my goal is to reuse as much components as possible, just unscrewing this little spring over there. In terms of design, that is super simple. It just presses the button upwards, and the button has little teeth in there, so when you press it down, it unlocks the teeth, and you can actually shove the entire bottom section down to adjust it to the size that you need. And once that spring is removed, you can see that it freely moves up and down. So to my surprise, the button doesn't actually fall out once you remove the string, and that means that it's made out of two components, right? And the top component is a little bit larger. So I grabbed some Knipex pliers and I started twisting on the top cap, and I could see that there was a rim in there, but wasn't entirely sure if this was a removable segment. It did come off relatively easy, but I don't think you should remove this thing too many times, because there's no thread in here or anything. So it would have been really nice if this was an actual bolt, and that it would bolt into place properly. Once all of those components are removed, you can see that the entire wrench pretty much falls apart. So I'm in a pretty fortunate position to where Creality sent me a 3D scanner a little while ago, and its laser mode is super good at scanning reflective surfaces like this one. So that's what we're doing right here, and this converts it into a 3D object. I can import that into the CAD software and basically recreate the entire wrench. Some people have actually managed to utilize the 3D scan and just modify that component, but for me it's always been the process of remodeling stuff. Now, taking apart the other multi-tool was a lot easier than the Knipex wrench. Basically it consists out of two bolts. As soon as you remove that, all of the tools on one side fall out. So at this point I also considered if we even needed to manufacture another component for this, or if we could just sand down the original handle and shove the other multi-tool into that. But in this case I thought it would be a little bit too messy and the handle would become a little bit too long. I took that second multi-tool to the 3D scanner as well, imported both of those into the CAD software, and I basically started to remodel the original Knipex handle, and then modifying that so that it fits inside of the other multi-tool. Now there are a couple of things that I am replacing, like the little bolt that holds the spring in place. So I made that go completely through the design so that we could put a nut on the other side, and that way it could be a little bit more sure that we can actually mount the spring without something going wrong when we send it off to be CNC machined. So of course before we do that I actually need to prototype this, and I just 3D printed it in PET-GHF, and this isn't necessarily strong, but it will allow us to see if all the measurements are correct and if it's still fluid in its handling. Now normally it takes me a couple iterations to get the handling correct, but in this case everything fit together quite nicely and it was quite smooth as well. So in general I'm quite happy with how the first model turned out. The whole system here is working, so that's pretty cool. I haven't tested the spring yet, but we'll do that in a minute. The only thing is this thing is way too long over here. But I noticed that if we just shove this forward quite a lot, and make an extra hole over there and make it a little bit thicker. That doesn't really matter too much. Yeah, it fits in place a lot better. At this point I did actually consider reverse engineering the entire Knipex wrench and starting from scratch, but I think that would be a little bit too expensive for a proof of concept video like this. So it's not the most ideal solution, but it's also not the cheapest solution out there. The second iteration is basically a little bit shorter, but it bends the multi-tool upwards a little bit, so the entire Knipex wrench is a little bit thicker than it used to be. This time around there were a little bit more support structures in the 3D print, and that made it a little tighter than the original one. And it still worked okay, but I noticed that as soon as the shaft was in there, it was actually blocking the movement when we want to open the jaws. So I went back to the CAD software and gave it a little bit more room at the top, and then 3D printed it again. So if you're enjoying the video so far, then definitely consider leaving a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. And if you don't know what to comment, you can also leave an emoji down there. So this was the final test, and everything seemed to fit together really quite nicely. We didn't have full range of motion for the jaws over there, but enough to where it still functions as a wrench. And the multi-tool is quite nice in terms of length, to where it matches up with the other arm. And I did reduce the height a little bit so that we can make sure that the CNC part would fit in there properly. After that, I sent it off to PCBWay. So PCBWay offers a lot of manufacturing services from PCB production and assembly, CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, and 3D printing. In this case, I'm 3D printing this in metal, and I'm also sending this off to PCBWay to be CNC machined, which is the first time I'm doing this, and I kind of wanted to compare the two to see what the cost difference is, and also what the quality difference is. So once you send those files off to PCBWay, a couple days later you'll receive a package in the mail with the parts in there. Now, to my surprise, 3D printing this in metal seemed to be a lot more cost effective than CNC machining it. Now, in terms of quality, I actually like the CNC part more because it's a little bit more shiny and it fits the tool a little bit better. But in terms of strength, it really relies on the post-processing side of things. If you post-process the metal 3D printed part in a very specific way, it does end up being quite similar to the CNC'd part. Now, I'm not entirely sure if you can get it as shiny and as clean as the CNC'd part, but maybe there's also a combo package where they kind of sand it down afterwards or something. So the first thing I shoved in here was the spring itself. Then I grabbed the main body, shoved that into place, and then put the little center column in place. So the center column and the rest is all just from the original Knipex. The only thing we really manufactured was a centerpiece for it. Now, the bolt from the original EDC tool was a little bit tight, so I used a larger Knipex wrench. And that also got me thinking it would be really cool to make a multi-tool out of one of these larger models, but that would be super expensive to actually do. So I'm actually quite shocked at how well this project turned out, and it definitely looks like a modification, but it also seems very clean, and you can still open the knife one-handedly, so that's super cool, and it has a lock in there as well. On the inside you have a holder for the bit, and on the other side you have a pair of scissors which also lock into place and has a little spring in there. So two other things that I would have loved to have in this thing is a pencil and some kind of Zippo lighter, or any kind of lighter really. So in general, I'm going to see how this thing works out over the next couple of months and then probably do an updated video. I'm really curious if we can, reverse engineer the entire Knipex wrench, make it a little bit larger, and then maybe put some extra tools in there as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope it gave you some inspiration, and hopefully see you in the next one.